Let's talk to Dr. Alan Mendoza now. He's the Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society and joins us to talk about, well, I mean, a whole range of topics, but all closely related. Alan, good morning to you.
Good morning,
Thank you for joining us. Can we talk first of all about the BBC? We've just been talking earlier about Greg Wallace, this report into his behaviour, but I'm actually rather more concerned about the anti-Semitism that I think is now rife and institutionalised in the BBC, and the fact that no one thought it was really a bit strange that there was the son of a Hamas government official who was fronting a documentary about life for children in Gaza. We're expecting that report from the BBC out today, and the key thing there is finding out, did anyone know or bother to check who this kid's dad was, given that outside organisations, including the campaign against anti-Semitism here in the UK, were able to find out very quickly through a cursory check online that this child was indeed the son of a member of a prescribed terrorist organisation who'd been paid by the BBC, and how senior people were in the BBC organisation, up to the head of BBC News, in terms of who knew. What do you make of this?
Well, it seems to me extraordinary that nobody knew. Surely you do background checks, particularly for going into an area where you are fully aware that you might be dealing with terrorist entities, and that at the very least you might be breaking sanctions rules, let alone dealing with prescribed terrorist organisations.
And you wouldn't be allowed to film in Gaza without permission from Hamas.
Well, exactly. So it seems to me that somebody must have known that there was some connection to the government of Gaza at the time, which was Hamas, of course. So from this perspective, it beggars belief. So we have to wait to see, Julia, don't we, to see what comes out into this report. But I think the BBC have got a legal case to answer when it comes to potential breach of British law in terms of this discussion.
Yeah.
And in terms of this documentary, it seems that they have gone beyond what the law allows, and I'd be quite interested to see how they try and spin their way out of that one.
Well, indeed, and again, for me, I find it absolutely extraordinary that there was a broadcasting, a pre-screening within BBC, which was of this documentary, was seen by the Chief Executive of BBC News and Current Affairs, that's Deborah Turness, and Joe Carr, the BBC's Head of Current Affairs. And did they say, so who is this kid then? Did anyone up the ranks say, who is this kid? And no, either people knew and they lied about it, or they didn't know and didn't do the cursory checks, or they did know, and yeah, everyone in the BBC knew this kid was the son of a Hamas official and didn't think it was an issue. Any one of those three options is very bad, and heads at whether it's the lowest middle ranking or upper levels, heads need to roll, don't they? People need to be fired for this.
Yeah, I think this is unsustainable given given what we know already about this case. As you say, of those three options, none of them are particularly palatable. And the ignorance option doesn't fly, really, because when it comes to breaking sanctions rules, ignorance is no excuse. Yeah. You have to make stringent checks when it comes to dealing with sanctioned entities or people to make sure that you are complying, even if you don't think there's a case to answer from the very beginning. You have to show you've gone through the process. So something's gone wrong with the BBC's processes. And given that this is such a high-profile case, it seems incredible that we wouldn't have, some sort of action taken that would see heads roll afterwards. But we'll have to wait to see, won't we?
Yeah, exactly. And I have to say, I mean, I watched the documentary, and documentary, frankly, is rather a generous word.
Loose.
I mean,
Yes.
it was, other than, of course, all the rubble. It was more like sort of, a travel, showcase, if you ask. It just wasn't at all what I would expect from the BBC when I'm being forced to pay the wages of everyone involved. And in fact, some of my money, some of everyone's money watching and listening to this has gone to Hamas as a result. And last time I looked, that was a crime.
Exactly. And this is the whole point. This is the national broadcaster who's is a taxpayer-funded institution, and therefore it is indeed our money that's ultimately being fungibly put over into other people's pockets. Yeah. And so it is a different setup to other channels in this regard, none of whom would be allowed to do this either, in my view. No, but exactly. The BBC is a special case here. And doesn't it just go down to the point that the BBC has just lost this trust, all the trust it once had? It's been chipped away for years, as we all know, but it's really come to the fore after October the 7th. We've seen the BBC in all its ugliness, and it strikes me that it's very difficult to see a way for the BBC to come back from this.
Well, exactly. And we got not only with, and there's a report, obviously, we haven't got that yet, into Bob Villan shouting, death, death, death to the IVF at Glastonbury, and no one thinking it was necessary to pull the plug on that, which was extraordinary. And it's interesting. And I don't think they're right about many things at Ofcom. The Ofcom Chief Executive, Dame Melanie Dawes, said these repeated fiascos has started to erode public trust and confidence in the BBC. She says they need to get a grip quicker get these reports and investigations concluded sooner. Otherwise, there's a real risk of a sort of loss of confidence in the BBC, which is a shame. And I couldn't agree with her more on that. And they brought it on themselves because, and again, this ties in with the next topic I want to bring into you, because this is a report commissioned by the Board of Deputies of British Jews, representing the country's sort of largest Jewish communities. And they commissioned a former Labour MP, now a peer, Lord Mann, the government's anti-Semitism advisor, and also the former Defence Secretary and Tory MP, Dame Penny Mordaunt. So two different sides of political divide, neither, by the way, Jewish. An independent report looking at anti-Semitism in Britain. And they found that anti-Semitism has been normalised in middle-class Britain, particularly in the public services, whether it's the NHS, whether it's in education, in culture, in the arts, in academia. And again, the BBC is at the heart of that. And I would say, yes, this is absolutely now normal. An awful lot of people who would be horrified to ever be thought of as racist against someone who was black or Asian or homophobic or transphobic, no issue whatsoever with holding and espousing views which are blatantly, openly anti-Semitic. Why do they not see how wrong that is?
Well, I'm afraid, look, firstly, the report itself, is anyone remotely surprised that this is the conclusion? None of us were going to go, were we? Oh, what a shock. Britain is, riddled, institutions are riddled anti-Semitism. We've seen it all. Everyone's seen this for their own eyes. It's an important report, but it is merely confirming what everyone has been able to see over the last few years. And the reality is it's getting worse, not getting better. Yeah. And it's been allowed to fester because the political leadership of this country has allowed it to happen in that way. It's allowed those marches on the streets, which did the most, I think, to normalise anti-Semitism in this country, the extraordinary things. I mean, these are things we'd never have seen even a few years ago, Julia, and now it's commonplace. What's happened to this country, really? You only have to look at those marches and you get the answer. It has gone to the dogs. It's gone downhill dramatically because of this sort of hatred that is spewed out week in, week out. This is not the kind of country we are, or certainly we used to be.
But it's masked, isn't it? Because, people don't shout that they hate Jews. They shout that they hate Israel, that they hate Zionists. People believe in the rights of Jews to have their own nation state. But then we had people extraordinary over the weekend shouting, go back to Israel to people, even though they're opposed to Israel. I don't know. It seems like a no-win there for the people they're shouting at. But when someone, and I make it clear that I support, Israel, I don't know how you could not support Israel in the battle against the savages that are Hamas terrorists or Iran, the Iranian leaders, Zionist. I mean, I just had someone spit that word, Zionist. And I'm like, and you're saying it like it's an insult. It's not an insult. It's a political viewpoint. It's not an insult, and it's certainly not one that I'm ashamed to hold or espouse publicly. But they are masking, are they not? They are masking, or think they are masking what there actually is, which is a dislike or hatred of Jews.
Yes, totally. But of course, it's coming out now. It started off as a mask, but the mask has slipped a long time ago. We've seen so many comments that are not simply focused on Israel, or Zionists, but are clearly directed, if not explicitly, but so obviously at Jews.
And attacks on Jewish-owned businesses.
Exactly, and all sorts of other sort of goods produced by Jews or services by. I mean, this whole thing is lunatic in terms of where it's gone, and you see the madness that's happening on university campuses, where graduation ceremony after graduation ceremony is being disrupted by this sort of pro-Palestine
performative. Look at me with my flag ridiculous. And my cafe.
Exactly, but this is part of it. The point is, it's been mollycoddled. It's been allowed. This is the reality, Julia. Are we surprised in the slightest that hatred festers when it's allowed to fester? There was an insufficient response from authorities at the start, and now the response is going to have to be a lot harder to put the genie back in the bottle.
Key thing to remember: while women were still being raped and children were being slaughtered and Israelis were being dragged, kicking and screaming, into Gaza to be held in tunnels, some of them still there, 500 plus days later. While that was still going on that day of 7th of October, the application went in to get the marches against Israel, the anti-Israel marches, the hate marches, as Suella Braverman, I think, quite wisely called them much earlier than I was calling them that. That went in before any action by Israel to retaliate against that horrific massacre of Jews on that day. But can you just explain, just to people, why people often go, well, I'm not Jewish, and a lot of people, if you don't live in, I mean, there's big Jewish communities in North London and in Manchester, but actually in large parts of the country it's quite normal. A lot of people may not know anybody they know to be Jewish. It's only at 250,000 population in total. Why is it that anti-Semitism and the rise of that should be such an alarm bell to society generally?
Well, it's because anti-Semitism is the ultimate conspiracy theory. Basically, throughout history, if you look at this sort of phenomena, you have seen Jews being blamed for everything. Jews have been blamed for capitalism, for communism, for the weather, for the Black Death, for this, for that, the other. Whatever the answer is, it can always be this mystical Jew as the sort of answer in this sort of way. And because it's the ultimate conspiracy theory, because societies that go down that route, they never stop at simply the Jews. You've never seen a society who've gone, oh, let's get rid of the Jews and then we'll stop. That's just the starting point, and history's shown us time and time again. So we should all be taking a stand against this sort of hatred, because it's firstly false and a lie, and secondly, it leads to other people being attacked, and we know how that ends for everyone else.
Yeah.
So better to stop it at the start rather than at the end when everyone's been taken by it.
Now, a lot of the criticism of Israel has been over, attacks which involve the deaths of civilians in Gaza. And we know that Hamas are using Palestinian civilians as their human shield. But we also know, if anyone's paying attention, that actually the death rate of civilians compared to combatant Hamas fighters is actually extraordinarily low compared to any other normal warfare, but not that facts matter in this debate. But we have seen lots of reports of Israeli Israeli fighters opening fire on civilians getting food aid and water aid. Now, again, amazingly, no video footage of any of these, even though everyone's got a video phone there. But Israel has blamed a technical error for a missile strike, they say, did kill 6 children collecting water in Gaza from a water tanker at the Al Nazariat refugee camp. They have admitted this, but they say it was an accident with a missile launcher. What do you make of that?
So, firstly, it's very sad. It's terrible when civilians die full stop. It's even worse when civilians die as a result of an accident. But I think this is an interesting case, isn't it? Because the Israelis have fessed up to it. They've gone, look, we've made a mistake. We got it wrong. And that's, interesting in and of itself, because that's what you would expect a Western liberal democratic army to do. We've done it, Julia. We had many an occasion, Afghanistan and Iraq, when we, had to hold up our hands and go, sorry, that was wrong, or the Americans in the same sort of, but we made a mistake in that way. That's what sadly happens in the heat of war. But to go back to the earlier point, the reason, unfortunately, civilians are dying, and you're right, of course, to highlight the lower ratio versus combatants in almost any other military arena we've seen. But the reason is because, sadly, civilians are legal targets when there are military units operating among them.
Yeah.
And so while one doesn't target the civilians, if there is a military unit, a terrorist unit within that using the civilians, unfortunately, under the laws of war, the Israelis are able to strike them. And that is just the legal right to do so.
And they invariably give warnings and again, far more than we have ever done. Alan Mendoza, always good to talk to you, Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society.